Hello students, it is Wednesday, March 18th. I am standing in front of a very big tree, and it's time for our daily dose of math. Let's have some fun. As usual, we're going to start with a little bit of a discussion about some math that you may be hearing in the news. Many of you, if you've been paying attention to the news, may have heard about testing, how much testing is being done for the coronavirus. There's a lot of talk about how we need to do more testing. And to talk about that, we're going to read this article from the New York Times, which is U.S. lags in coronavirus testing after slow response to the outbreak. Like I said, it was published in the New York Times on March 17th, which was yesterday. So let's take a look. The article starts by giving us three graphs to show us how much testing has been done in three different countries. The United States, Italy is in the middle, and all the way on the right is South Korea. Now, all of these graphs share the same axis. So on our horizontal axis, we have time. So it starts in January, moves through February, and ends up in current day in the middle of March. And on our vertical axis, we have the number of people who have been tested. So if you start by looking at South Korea all the way on the right, South Korea has had one of the best responses to the coronavirus outbreak, and they've been doing a really good job of keeping the virus as contained as possible. Now, the way they've been doing that, one of the ways is by testing a lot. So you can see, starting in February, they weren't doing much testing. And then over here, we have a lot of testing, a lot of yellow testing, and then the testing starts to jump. The yellow bars represent the number of people tested. The red bars represent the number of confirmed cases or positive tests. So you can see each day, the number of people tested is above 10,000. Since before March, since about the beginning of March, there have been over 10,000 people tested a day, sometimes way more. If you take a look at Italy, which is one of the countries that has been hit hardest by the coronavirus, they also have been doing a lot of testing, 134,000 tests with 28,000 confirmed cases. And again, the graph looks pretty similar. Starts low, and then as soon as people start noticing that the virus is spreading, there's more and more testing being done. More and more, and again, over 10,000 in recent days, over 10,000. And again, Italy has been hit very bad. That's why you see so many of these red lines over here. Italy has had a very hard time containing the virus compared to South Korea. If you come over all the way to the left and look at the United States, you see there have been much fewer amounts of tests given. 25,000 specimens were tested. 4,400 confirmed cases. And you can tell the graph is really low throughout March, and even once it starts to build, it never reaches the height of Italy or South Korea. We're only at a little bit over 2,000 tests done per day, compared to over 10,000 for South Korea and Italy. And this article goes into more detail talking about that. The next graph in the article says that maybe things have been getting a little bit better in the last few days. If you'll notice on the graph from before, our data from the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control in the United States, the CDC don't have any numbers from March 12th to March 16th. That's why this area, it's incomplete. We're not sure the accuracy of these numbers. But there is another organization which is basically an internet-started organization, from what I understand, called the COVID Tracking Project. And this has been just a number of people online gathering data from wherever they can. So this graph comes from the COVID Tracking Project. And if you take a look at this graph, things look a little bit better for the United States with testing. Again, in March, we're around under 2,000. But in the last few days of March, this data shows that we are reaching above 10,000 tests per day, near 12,000. Only in the most recent days. So in the very last day or two, according to this data, we have increased the number of testing being done. The amount of testing being done. Before we move on to our last graph, I want to have a quick discussion about percents, and I'm going to tell you a little story. We have one student over here, and I'm a very good artist, so I'm just going to draw something very quickly. There we go. This student is very happy because they took a test on this piece of paper that is regular sized, and they got 10 questions correct. 10 correct. And they are so happy. They're like, yes, I did it. Life is a victory. Then we go to another student who's in another class. This student is a little bit older, different class. You can see they're older. They got the classy chin. They also have a regular sized piece of paper. And in their class, they got 20 correct on their test. Two different tests. One student got 10 correct, the other student got 20 correct. Before you knew anything about percents, you probably would have said, oh, well, this student did better. They got 20 questions correct, and that's more than 10 questions correct. But when you get to 6th grade and 7th grade, you learn about percents, and you start thinking, well, wait a minute. How many questions were on each test? If our student on the left got 10 questions correct out of 10 questions, that would give him a grade of 100%, which is a perfect score. And if our student on the right over here got 20 questions correct out of 100, say there were 100 questions on that test, they only got a 20%. These percentages allow us to compare easily parts with different total wholes. So we have 10 out of 10. How does that compare to 20 out of 100? We convert them to percents, and it really helps us see that, wow, the student on the left did 100% on his exam, where the person on the right only got 20% on their exam. So percentages allow us to compare things that have different amounts, and that's going to come up in our next graph. So in our final graph, you see that we are comparing coronavirus tests per 1 million people. So these are not percents because percents are out of 100, but they are similar to percents because they are rates. We're talking about coronavirus tests per 1 million people. So out of every 1 million people, how many tests are given? Because the big thing about all these countries on this graph and the last graph we looked at is that they have very different populations. So while South Korea is testing 20,000 people a day sometimes, and the US, we saw in that last graph, may be testing up to 12,000 people, they have different total amounts. So just like we couldn't compare 10 questions correct to 20 questions correct without getting a full picture, we can't do that unless we take into account the populations, which is what this graph does. And this graph shows even more how far behind the United States is on testing and why we need way more testing very soon. If you look, United States has the lowest coronavirus tests per 1 million people. So for every 1 million people that live in the United States, and there are about 326 million people living in the US, so per every 1 million, only around 100 people have been tested. 100 out of 1 million. And I just said 100 out of 1 million, which to me sounds a lot like a fraction. So I'm going to write that as a fraction, and I'm going to divide, and I'm going to ultimately turn that to a percent. And I'll find out that 0.01% is the amount of people that are being tested in the United States. 0.01%. If 100 out of 1 million, that calculates to about 0.01%. And we can compare that to the testing in South Korea. We'll look at the top testing nation, South Korea. They're testing over 5,000 people per 1 million. Again, this is just talking of how many people are we testing for every 1 million people that there are, to make it easier to compare different nations with different populations. So if we're looking at South Korea, I would write a fraction 5,000 out of 1 million. And if I converted that to a percent, it would leave me with 0.5%, or 0.5%. Now you might look at these two numbers and think, wow, they're very small. They're both very small. They look pretty close together. But on our graph, they definitely don't look close together. And the reason we can compare them, the way we can compare them mathematically, is by dividing. So if I divide the percentage from South Korea, which is 0.5, or 1/2, if I divide that by 0.01%, which is the number coming out of the United States, if I do that division, I get a factor of 50. I get a number of 50, which tells me that the South Korean population is being tested at a rate 50 times as high as the United States. So South Korea is testing 50 times the amount of people when you consider their population. And that is a very big number. The reason that you will see on the news people calling for the United States to start testing more and more and more is because what this testing has done for South Korea. South Korea has had a very small number of cases since the outbreak has started. They have really limited the growth. They have done a great job of flattening the curve, as we talked about in the last couple of videos. And the way they did that was not only by social distancing, but also by testing, testing, testing. The more you test, the more you understand the virus and the more you understand where the virus currently is. And if we know where it is, then we know where our attention needs to go. And testing is the best way to do that. So we should look at nations like South Korea and say, what are they doing well? How do we catch up to them? One of those answers is to increase testing. So you're going to see a lot of talk about drive-through testings and more testing coming out, and all of that is good news. So be on the lookout for that. I am so excited to talk about this puzzle because, as I said yesterday, it is so annoying. It took me so long to figure this out. So the question is, in what parking spot number is the car parked? And it looks like we have spot 16, spot 6, spot 68, spot 88, and spot 98. Now, the first time I did this problem, I was looking for all sorts of patterns. I was saying 1 and 6, 0 and 6. Okay, so maybe you take 1 away from the tens digit and keep the ones digit the same. Then I came over here and it was 6 and 8. I said, oh, okay, so maybe you move the ones digit into the tens digit and then add 8 to the ones digit. And then we come to 88 and I said, oh, maybe you take the ones place 8 and just double it. And then we came to 98 and I could not find any sort of pattern. I spent probably 45 minutes the first time I saw this puzzle, just dividing, adding, seeing what patterns I could get. And only when I did something like this did I truly see how easy this puzzle was if I had a different perspective. If you flip the puzzle upside down, it becomes clear that this is the number 86, this is spot 87, 88, 89, 90, and 91. The spots, the image was merely upside down. So all you needed to do was look at this problem a different way, and it teaches us a great lesson about math. Sometimes something seems really complicated, and all you have to do is just get a little bit of different perspective. So if you got it right, terrific. Today's puzzle is another one of my all-time favorites, puzzle number 3. The goal of this puzzle is that you need to measure exactly 1 cup of water. Anyone who's ever made a recipe before and you didn't have the measuring cups you needed to measure the exact amount, this puzzle is for you. Because all you have in your kitchen are 2 containers. The smaller container holds exactly 3 cups. The larger container holds exactly 5 cups. How can you do it? How can you measure exactly 1 cup of water? There are no lines on these cups. You can't fill up halfway and estimate that it's half of that because you need an exact measurement. How can you measure exactly 1 cup of water? Think about it, and we'll talk about the answer tomorrow. As always, we are going to end the video by practicing some positivity. Yesterday, I introduced you to one of the greatest people ever, Mr. Rogers, and today I will introduce you to another one of the greatest people ever, Bob Ross. This man right here. Look at his glorious hair. Look at it. He's wonderful. He's the best person. And he was an artist who used to go on TV, and he would paint landscapes. And while he was painting, he would just say the most inspirational things. And when I was a kid, I used to get an easel and sit in front of the TV, and I would try to paint along with him. But as you saw from my drawings earlier, I'm not that great of an artist, so my paintings would never look like his. But he never made me feel bad about it, because he's that nice. And his quote is right here. Look around. Look at what we have. Beauty is everywhere. You only have to look to see it. And this reminded me of our quote yesterday about looking for the helpers. There is a lot of negativity going on in the world right now, and always, if you're looking for negativity, you're going to find it. Instead of doing that, for yourself, for your own sanity and your own happiness, try to look for things that aren't negative. Try to look for beauty, because it is everywhere. You only have to pay attention. So that's our message for today. If you have any ideas, throw them in the comments. Please try out that puzzle, and I will see you tomorrow.